History of the Amalekites. Long before the era of kings and empires, in the arid and wild regions of the ancient Near East, the Amalekites emerged as a distinct and formidable people. Their origins are rooted in a complex tangle of tribal lineages, war-ravaged lands, and relentless survival in a hostile world. Descendants of Amalek, the grandson of Esau, Genesis 36:12, the Amalekites inherited a legacy of fierce independence, making their name synonymous with terror and resistance throughout biblical history. Origins and ancestry. The Amalekites trace their lineage back to Esau, the brother of Jacob. Esau had a son named Eliphaz, who fathered Amalek through a concubine named Timnah. Thus Amalek became the progenitor of a tribe that would inhabit the lands south of Canaan, particularly in the arid and treacherous regions of the Negev Desert and the Sinai Peninsula. This harsh environment shaped the Amalekites into a nomadic people, skilled in survival, raids, and warfare. From their earliest mentions in biblical history, the Amalekites were identified as enemies of the Israelites. When the Israelites were journeying through the wilderness after their exodus from Egypt, the Amalekites launched an unprovoked attack against them. This attack, recorded in Exodus 17:8-16, would mark the beginning of a long and bloody conflict between the two peoples. Moses, under divine instruction, commanded Joshua to lead the Israelites into battle, while he himself held up the staff of God on a hilltop. As long as Moses' hands were raised, the Israelites prevailed, but when his hands lowered, the Amalekites gained the advantage. With the support of Aaron and Hur, Moses' hands remained steady, and the Israelites ultimately defeated the Amalekites. After the battle, God declared that he would blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven, establishing a lasting enmity. Exodus 17:14. The land of the Amalekites. The Amalekites occupied a vast and rugged region, stretching across the southern part of Canaan, the Negev, and extending into the Sinai Peninsula. This region was a desert landscape, harsh and unforgiving, dotted with mountains and valleys where water and resources were scarce. The Amalekites, as a nomadic people, were adept at navigating this unforgiving environment, moving their herds of livestock and setting up temporary camps wherever they found sustenance. Although they were a nomadic people, the Amalekites had influence over trade routes that passed through their territory. Their proximity to trade routes connecting Egypt, Arabia, and Mesopotamia gave them access to commerce, and they were known to raid caravans, using their knowledge of the desert to their advantage. However, they were not a settled people, and their wealth derived more from plunder than from established trade. Army and warfare. The Amalekites were known for their military prowess, particularly in guerrilla tactics. They were raiders, striking quickly and disappearing into the desert before their enemies could mount a proper defense. Their attacks were often marked by brutality, as they targeted the weak and vulnerable. In Deuteronomy 25:17-19, Moses reminds the Israelites how the Amalekites attacked them when they were weary and straggling, showing no fear of God. This ruthless approach to warfare became a defining characteristic of the Amalekites, making them feared adversaries. Despite their skill in battle, the Amalekites were not a highly organized military power like the empires of Egypt or Assyria. Instead, their strength lay in their mobility, knowledge of the terrain, and ability to strike unexpectedly. This made them difficult to subdue, as they could retreat into the desert and survive in conditions fatal to their enemies. One of the most significant encounters between the Israelites and the Amalekites occurred during the reign of King Saul. In 1 Samuel 15, God commanded Saul through the prophet Samuel to completely destroy the Amalekites as punishment for their past sins against Israel. Saul led a campaign against them, but disobeyed God's command by sparing Agag, the Amalekite king, and keeping the best of the livestock for himself. This act of disobedience cost Saul his kingship, as God rejected him as the king of Israel. Samuel himself executed King Agag, but the Amalekite threat was not entirely eliminated. Religion and customs. Little is known about the specific religious practices of the Amalekites, as they are more defined by their antagonistic relationship with Israel in the biblical narrative. However, as descendants of Esau, who was the grandson of Abraham, it is possible that the Amalekites retained some knowledge of the God of their forefathers. Despite this, they are portrayed as a people who rejected God, living in opposition to divine purposes for Israel. The Amalekites, like other tribes in the ancient Near East, likely practiced some form of polytheism, worshipping deities associated with nature, fertility, and war. Their nomadic lifestyle and survival in harsh environments would have influenced their religious beliefs, possibly leading them to venerate gods that could provide protection, water, and victory in battle. However, the Bible does not provide detailed descriptions of their religious practices, focusing instead on their role as enemies of Israel. Biblical mentions and conflicts. Let's revisit the key moments where the Amalekites played a significant role. In Exodus 17:8-16, the Amalekites attacked the Israelites at Rephidim, but were defeated by Joshua's forces with divine intervention from Moses. In Deuteronomy 25:17-19, there is a command to remember how the Amalekites attacked Israel, with a call to erase their memory once the Israelites were settled in the Promised Land. In Numbers 14:39-45, after the Israelites' refusal to enter the Promised Land, they attempted to invade it without God's blessing, only to be driven back by the Amalekites and Canaanites. In Judges 3:13, the Amalekites allied with the Moabites and Ammonites to oppress Israel during the time of the Judges, but were defeated by Ehud. In Judges 6:3-5, the Amalekites, along with the Midianites and other eastern peoples, invaded Israel during Gideon's time, devastating the land by destroying crops and livestock. Gideon eventually defeated them with a small force. In 1 Samuel 15, Saul led a campaign against the Amalekites, disobeyed God's command to destroy them completely, and was rejected as king. In 1 Samuel 30, the Amalekites raided Ziklag, a city where David and his men were staying, capturing their families and burning the city. David pursued and defeated them, recovering everything that was taken. In 2 Samuel 1:1-10, after Saul's death, an Amalekite came to David claiming to have killed the wounded king. David ordered the man executed for having harmed God's anointed. Finally, in 1 Chronicles 4:42-43, a group of Simeonites attacked and killed the remaining Amalekites during the days of Hezekiah, signaling the final destruction of the Amalekite people. Decline and disappearance of the Amalekites. Once a fierce and formidable people, the Amalekites gradually declined in power and influence as Israel and other regional powers grew stronger. Despite their many conflicts with Israel, their ultimate fate was sealed by divine decree. The Amalekites were systematically defeated and diminished over several generations. By the time of King Hezekiah, only a remnant of the Amalekites remained, and they were finally annihilated by the Simeonites. 1 Chronicles 4:42-43. Although the Amalekites are mentioned symbolically during the time of Esther, where Haman, a descendant of Agag, plotted to destroy the Jews, Esther 3:1, this was a symbolic connection to the ancient enmity between Israel and Amalek. Haman's downfall in the book of Esther can be seen as the final chapter in the long history of conflict between these two peoples, fulfilling the promise that God would erase the name of Amalek from under heaven. Conclusion: the legacy of Amalek. The history of the Amalekites is one of hostility, survival, and eventual destruction. From their origins as descendants of Esau to their role as persistent enemies of Israel, The Amalekites are portrayed as a people living in defiance of God's plans for His chosen people. Their attacks on Israel, particularly targeting the weak and vulnerable, made them a symbol of cruelty in the biblical narrative. Yet their story also serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of living in opposition to God. The Amalekites may have vanished from the historical record, but their legacy endures in the lessons they leave behind. The biblical mandate to remember the Amalekites and their actions serves as a reminder of the importance of justice, mercy, and obedience to God. Even as the Amalekites disappeared into history, their memory lives on, a testament to the enduring conflict between good and evil, faithfulness and rebellion that defines the human experience.